Will, are you still lingering here? Mrs. Lewis inquired, her eyes filled with genuine concern. Don't you have some responsibilities or duties to attend to? Actually, not at this moment, Mrs. Lewis, replied Will, his tone underpinned by a slight plea. You see, they haven't admitted any severe cases today, so I've wrapped all of my assigned tasks. If you don't mind, may I stay here a little longer? I hope you don't feel the need to send me away. Remember, I'm using this time to prepare myself for my forthcoming educational journey? Mrs. Lewis, a seasoned nurse, let out a weary sigh. Interesting. I wasn't under the impression you were particularly invested in such pursuits, she countered. At a glance, it seems like you're merely idling away your time here, not doing anything productive. Wouldn't it be better to dive into your textbooks? Mrs. Lewis, my time here isn't wasted, Will responded earnestly. I may not be actively working, but I'm soaking up invaluable hands-on experience. Mrs. Lewis responded with a disheartened shake of her head, fully understanding the subtext of Will's statement about gaining experience. Olivia was the experience Will was seeking, not the professional kind, but rather a romantic interest. She was the reason behind his frequent, lingering visits to this particular department. Olivia was an undeniable beauty, possessing an allure that was hard to ignore. However, her beauty was offset by an air of arrogance that clung to her like a second skin. Her personality was akin to that of a serpent, slick and potentially treacherous. There he stood, Will, a fully grown man, smitten by the enchanting but aloof Olivia. It could be argued that his infatuation was a personal matter, one in which others had no right to interfere. Yet Mrs. Lewis couldn't help but feel a twinge of sympathy for him. He was a good young man, compassionate, always ready to lend a helping hand. However, Mrs. Lewis harbored a firm conviction, a gut feeling born from years of observing human behavior. She was certain that Olivia would never return Will's affectionate sentiments. She understood the likely heartbreak that awaited Will, and it was a bitter pill to swallow. Will, a former soldier, had chosen to transition into the medical field after his military service. The aspiration to become a healthcare professional had been nestled in his heart for quite a while. The timing had not been right until now. It seemed he was finally preparing for the journey. When he first dived into the world of medicine, he wasn't enticed by the prospect of a hefty paycheck. Rather, he was intrigued by the inner workings of nursing, the direct impact on patients' lives that the profession promised. Mrs. Lewis was confident that Will would excel as a medical professional. Not only did he possess an impressive intellect, but he also showed genuine interest in patients' experiences, consistently demonstrating a heartfelt desire to help them. What stood out about Will was his palpable enthusiasm to be a doctor. This ambition was so apparent that Mrs. Lewis couldn't help but notice it. She knew his dreams could indeed become a reality, provided Olivia didn't shatter his resilience. Fortunately, that day, Olivia was off duty. It was Dakota's shift instead, which would commence later in the evening. Dakota was a charming and humble girl, hailing from a rural farming community. Her family was comprised of hard-working farmers, and her upbringing was a reflection of their humble and diligent lifestyle. Dakota was a generous individual, always willing to lend a helping hand to those in need. It was a trait ingrained in her through her upbringing. While Olivia performed her duties as per her job description, like administering injections or measuring patients' blood pressures, Dakota went above and beyond. She was known to assist the janitorial staff in moving equipment through the corridors or to help change bad linens in the wards whenever she had spare time. Dakota's actions illustrated her innate kindness and her commitment to the well-being of the hospital community. That evening, as Dakota was beginning her shift, the department phone trilled into life. She picked it up, listening attentively to the caller. After a moment, she asked the person on the other end to hold on and turned to Will. "They've brought in an elderly woman. They need some assistance. Could you go down?" she asked. With a swift nod, Will rushed down to reception. The old woman lay unconscious on a gurney, her frail form inspiring a deep sadness in Will's eyes. "What happened?" Will questioned the paramedic. "Was it a car accident?" "No," replied the paramedic, shaking his head. "She was found at her home. The specifics are unclear at the moment. Her neighbors discovered her on the staircase." Will's gaze returned to the elderly woman, concern etched on his face. "She's in pretty rough shape," he observed quietly, Considering her age, it's uncertain if she'll pull through. The medical team transported the woman to the intensive care unit. Will was frequently present by her side, providing whatever assistance he could. In time, the attending physician, Dr. Andrews, started examining her scans. "Hey, intern," he called out to Will. "Take a look at these. You might learn something." Will scrutinized the scans for an extended period, but nothing seemed out of the ordinary to his untrained eye. He handed the scans back, admitting, "I'm not sure if I'm supposed to spot anything specific, but I don't see anything unusual." "That's okay. It's common when you're just starting," Dr. Andrews reassured him. "But you're correct. There's nothing amiss in these scans. However, her body does show signs of extensive bruising." Will looked at the doctor, his surprise evident. "So, what does that imply?" "Why don't you mull over it during your shift?" Dr. Andrews suggested, a small smile playing on his lips. "In the morning, we'll discuss our respective findings." Will nodded his understanding. Dr. Andrews often challenged them with problems to solve, a task he usually managed well. This was another such puzzle, and as he paced in the wake of the doctor, he turned over every word in his mind. The answers seemed just beyond his reach. Dr. Andrews frequently advised, knowing the cause of the disease is the key to curing it. It's essential to eliminate the cause. While Will didn't fully subscribe to this notion, he acknowledged there was a kernel of truth in it. Turning to Dakota, Dr. Andrews instructed, "Ensure you monitor her blood pressure hourly. Administer painkillers as necessary. That's her course of action for now." "Understood, Dr. Andrews. So, what's her story?" Dakota inquired. Dr. Andrews glanced at Will, replying, "We'll hear Will's take on it in the morning." Dakota smiled, looking at Will. "Giving him some training, huh?" "Indeed," Dr. Andrews replied, grinning back at Will. "Unless, of course, he's not interested in becoming a real doctor." Will devoted the entire night to scouring the internet for any insights that could help him solve this medical puzzle. Occasionally, he would return to the old woman's bedside, observing her condition closely. He noticed the emergence of tiny crimson-blue marks scattered across her body, which he recognized as bruises. Dr. Andrews had been correct in his assessment. The patterns of bruising were inconsistent with a simple fall. For these marks to appear as they did, the woman would have had to tumble down the stairs multiple times and in a variety of ways. Lost in a sea of hypotheses, Will struggled to find a plausible explanation. However, as often happens with elusive answers, the solution dawned on him while he was deep in slumber. As morning drew near, a weary Will found himself succumbing to sleep on the couch. In his dreams, he revisited a terrifying memory from his childhood. He saw his younger self, barely 6 or 7 years old, seated on the living room sofa. His mother busied herself in the kitchen while his father was at work. Will eagerly waited his father's return, anticipating an evening lesson in the enchanting game of chess. During this time, Will's family resided in a small, tight-knit town, a place where everyone was familiar with everyone else. The locals could even identify their neighbors' dogs at a glance. The sense of community was strong, and the low crime rate meant that people rarely felt the need to lock their doors. When the front door slammed shut, Will's mother flashed a knowing smile from the kitchen, announcing, "Here comes Daddy." But as she turned to greet her husband, her smile faded into a look of sheer disbelief. Her voice trembled as she stammered, "What are you doing here?" A stranger stood in the doorway, his face twisted into a malicious grin. Young Will instinctively recoiled, feeling an ominous aura emanating from the man. The stranger sneered. "Can't even muster a polite good evening, huh? Weren't expecting me, were you, wifey?" "I'm not your wife. I haven't been for 5 years." "Why are you here?" she responded, her voice trembling but defiant. "Easy there, wifey." "Stop that. Stop calling me that. I'm not your wifey." "That was your decision, wasn't it? Have you ever stopped to think if I had a say in it too? Probably not." Simon held her gaze, allowing a tense silence to fill the room. "Nobody bothered to ask me. Nobody cared about my feelings. Would you like to hear my opinion?" His voice rose in pitch, seething with resentment. "I disagree with your decision. I don't think it's fair for a man to clean grimy prison floors while his wife flits about enjoying life with someone else." A sly grin spread across Simon's face, quickly morphing into a scowl. Simon, you need to leave, Catherine implored, concern etched into her features.